At my daughter's wedding rehearsal dinner, her fiancé stood up with a champagne glass in one hand and his other arm draped around a man in a charcoal suit, and he said, "Marcus, this is Sophie's dad. He's been unemployed for years. Kind of a loser, honestly. But we're letting him sit at the big table tonight, aren't we, Soph?" The room laughed. Not everyone, but enough. My hands went cold. I felt the blood pull out of my face like a tide going out. That slow, heavy drain, and my fingers tightened around the napkin in my lap until the fabric bunched into a hard knot against my palm. I looked at my daughter. She smiled at Grant the way you smile at a child who's just said something embarrassing, indulgent, practiced, hollow, and she didn't say a word. I said 8 words to his boss that night that dismantled everything Grant had built. And that was only the first domino. Because what Grant didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I'd spent the previous 4 months quietly pulling apart every lie his family had been feeding my daughter. And by the time he stood up with that champagne glass and called me a loser in front of 40 people, I was already holding the evidence that would bring his entire world down around his ears. If you've ever been humiliated by the exact people you gave everything to protect, don't go anywhere. Subscribe if you want to hear more stories like this one, and drop a comment if you've been there, because this one is just getting started. But to understand why those 8 words hit the way they did, I need to take you back 4 months. To the first evening I sat at Catherine Pemberton's dining table and realized the man my daughter was marrying didn't see me as a father. He saw me as a problem. The house was in Edgemont, one of those neighborhoods where every lawn looks like it was cut with scissors, and every front door has a wreath that matches the season. Catherine's house was a Georgian colonial, white columns, black shutters, a mailbox with the family name engraved on a brass plate. I parked my 2012 FONE 150 behind a row of BMWs and Audis. And I remember sitting in the cab for a full minute before I got out, not because I was nervous, but because I could already feel it. The distance between my world and this one, measured in roofing materials and lease agreements and the thread count of tablecloths. I wore clean jeans, a pressed button-down, my good boots, the walnut leather Red Wings I'd resoled twice in 20 years. I'd built Sophie's treehouse in those boots. I'd framed 300 houses in those boots. They were the nicest thing I owned, and they were the first thing Catherine looked at when she opened the door. Her eyes dropped to my feet, then rose to my face, and the smile she gave me never went past her cheekbones. "Tom, so glad you could make it." She said my name the way you'd say rain at a garden party, acknowledging it, regretting it, moving on. Grant was in the living room, pouring wine. He was 30. Tall, gym-built, with the kind of jaw that looked like it was designed for a profile picture. He shook my hand with a grip that was 3 pounds too hard, and said, "Tom, welcome to the family estate." He said, estate with a wink, like he was letting me in on the joke, but the joke was that the house belonged to a bank carrying 2 mortgages on it, a detail I wouldn't learn for months. Sophie was in the kitchen. She came out in a dress I hadn't seen before. Something cream-colored and structured that I knew cost more than my truck payment, and she hugged me, and for a second, a brief, warm second, she was my kid again, my Sophie, the girl who used to sit on the tailgate with me eating sandwiches while I framed houses in the summer heat. Then she pulled back and looked at my boots and said, "Dad, didn't you bring the shoes I sent you?" I had. They were in the truck, loafers, leather, brand new. She'd ordered them for me 2 weeks earlier, and when I had tried them on at home, they felt like wearing someone else's skin. "I'll go change," I said. "Please," she whispered. And the fact that she whispered it, that she didn't want Catherine to hear, told me everything about where I stood in this house. I went to the truck. I put on the loafers. I left the boots on the floor mat. And as I walked back up Catherine's stone walkway in shoes that pinched my arches, I thought about something my own father used to say when I was a kid, learning to swing a hammer. Never dress like the man you're trying to impress. Dress like the man who built the room he's standing in. I didn't fully understand what he meant that night. I would later. Dinner was 7 people around a table that could have seated 12. Catherine sat at one end, Grant at the other, Sophie beside Grant. I was seated next to a woman named Dorothy, Catherine's sister, a thin-lipped woman in pearls who asked me, within 4 minutes of sitting down, what I did for a living. I'm retired, I said. I ran a construction company for about 28 years. Sold it a few years back. What was the company called? Grant asked, not looking up from his wine. Callaway Construction. He nodded like he'd heard of it, but his expression said he hadn't. And now you're just enjoying the downtime? I do some consulting. Handiwork around the house. I built my house, actually. Every wall, every cabinet. Catherine set her fork down. You built your own house? That's charming. Charming. The word landed on the table like a dead leaf. Weightless, decorative, already dry. Where do you live, Tom? Dorothy asked. Riverside. Off Miller Road. There was a pause. A very specific kind of pause. The kind where everyone at the table knows the neighborhood you just named and has already filed it under the category of places they don't go. Riverside was working class. Small lots, older homes, pickup trucks in driveways. It was where I'd raised Sophie, where her childhood bedroom still existed, posters on the wall, soccer trophies on the shelf, and I could feel the table reclassify me in real time, from retired businessman to something less. Grant cleared his throat. Well, Sophie and I are hoping to find something in Edgemont eventually, get a foothold in the right area. Schools matter when you're thinking about kids, you know? He smiled at Sophie. She smiled back. Neither of them looked at me. Catherine asked about my plans. A word she used 3 times, always with a faint tilt of the head, as though my plans were a medical condition she was monitoring. Grant talked about his career at Meridian Partners, a commercial real estate development firm. He used words like pipeline and portfolio and deal flow, and each time he said one, Catherine nodded like he'd just quoted scripture. And then there was the moment I almost missed. Catherine got up to refill the water pitcher, and as she passed behind Grant's chair, I heard her lean in and say something I wasn't supposed to hear. 2 sentences, barely voiced. Did the line clear? And Grant's answer, equally quiet. Not yet. We need the wedding first. I didn't know what the line was. I didn't know what the wedding had to do with it. But I filed it, the same way I used to file a hairline crack in a foundation wall. You don't ignore it. You mark it. You come back to it later. Because hairline cracks become structural failures if you pretend they're not there. I drove home that night in the dark. The loafers were on the passenger seat. The boots were back on my feet. And somewhere between Edgemont and Riverside, Sophie called me. Dad, how do you think it went? Fine, sweetheart. You looked uncomfortable. I was wearing the wrong shoes. She paused. They're good people, Dad. They just have a different way of doing things. I know. Grant's really trying. Just meet him halfway, okay? Please. I said I would. I hung up, and I sat in my driveway for a long time, staring at the house I'd built with my own hands. The porch, the eaves, the front door I'd hung and rehung twice to get the swing exactly right. And I thought about what Sophie wasn't saying. She wasn't saying I love him. She wasn't saying he's a good man. She was saying meet him halfway, which is what you say when you already know the other person isn't coming your direction at all. Let me tell you who I was, so you understand why what happened next cut so deep. I was 23 when Sophie was born. Her mother, Diane, left when Sophie was 7, walked out on a Tuesday morning, left a note on the kitchen counter that said, I'm not built for this, and never came back. I found the note under a coffee cup, still warm. I was standing in my kitchen in my work boots, covered in drywall dust from a job site, and I read those 4 words and I did the only thing I knew how to do. I went to work. I came home, I fed my daughter, I did it again the next day, and the day after that. And for the next 21 years, I built things. Houses, buildings, a business, a life for a girl who deserved one. I started Callaway Construction with a used truck, a nail gun, and $1,200 I'd borrowed against my life insurance. Within 10 years, I had 60 employees and contracts across 3 counties. I built schools. I built medical offices. I built the Westbrook Commons Shopping Center, a project that put my name on the map in this region's development industry. I didn't go to galas. I didn't join the country club. I wore flannel to client meetings, and when the bankers in their suits raised their eyebrows, I'd open my blueprints and show them load calculations that made the eyebrows go down. I sold the company in 2019 to a private equity group. The number was enough that I'd never have to work again, and I didn't need anyone to know it. That was the thing. I didn't need anyone to know it. I lived in Riverside. I drove an old truck. I wore work boots and flannel. I didn't have a LinkedIn profile. I had a house I'd built, a garden I tended, and a daughter I'd put through 4 years of a private university without a single student loan. Sophie's tuition was $58,000 a year. I paid every semester on time, sometimes with checks that cleared my account to within $200 of zero, because that's what you do. You don't tell your kid you're broke. You write the check and you eat sandwiches for a month. She never asked how I did it. She never asked if it was hard. And I never told her, because that's not why you do it. You don't do it for gratitude. You do it because she's your kid, and the world doesn't get to tell her she's not enough. But when she brought Grant into my life, I began to understand something I hadn't wanted to see. The world she'd entered didn't just not care about what I'd given, it was actively repelled by the sight of the man who'd given it. My hands were rough, my truck was old, my house was small. And in the Pemberton universe, those weren't signs of a life built honestly. They were signs of a life that hadn't succeeded. The engagement party was 8 weeks later, and it was where the second piece of the mystery surfaced. It was at a venue called the Ivy Room. Exposed brick, Edison bulbs, a string quartet in the corner playing something I didn't recognize. There were 70 people. I knew 3 of them. I wore the loafers. Grant's family filled the room like they'd been born in it. His uncle Richard, who introduced himself as in private equity within 10 seconds of shaking my hand. His cousin Blair, who kept adjusting her scarf and looking past me to see if someone more important had arrived. And Catherine, in a midnight blue gown, holding court near the bar, accepting congratulations with the practiced grace of a woman who'd been rehearsing this evening in her head for months. I stood near a highboy table, with a glass of sparkling water, and watched my daughter move through the crowd. She was good at it. The laugh, the touch on the arm, the lean in. She'd learned their language. And as I watched her, I realized she hadn't learned it from me. She'd learned it from them. Somewhere in the last year, Sophie had crossed a line I couldn't see, and the woman on the other side of it wasn't the girl I'd raised. She was a version of herself built for this room, and the version of me that went with her, the one in work boots and flannel, didn't fit. I was walking toward the restroom when I passed a small alcove near the kitchen. A service hallway, half hidden by a curtain. Catherine was standing there, phone to her ear, and she wasn't whispering. She was hissing. Tell him the line of credit is contingent on the marital asset merge. If the wedding doesn't go through by November, they'll call the note. All of it. Do you understand what that means? I stopped. My hand was on the wall. She didn't see me. I don't care what Grant has to do. Sophie's income is on the application, and once they're married, the house comes into play. Her father's house. It's paid off, fully. That equity is the only collateral we have left. My heart rate didn't spike. My hands didn't shake. I stood there with absolute stillness, the way you stand on a roofline when you feel the truss shift. You don't move. You don't react. You listen to the structure, and you figure out where the weight is going. Her father's house. That equity is the only collateral we have left. I backed away. I went to the restroom. I washed my hands. I looked at my face in the mirror, a 56-year-old man with sun-creased skin and a jaw that had been hit by a 2x4 once in 2004, and I said to my reflection, very quietly, "They're not marrying Sophie. They're marrying your house." I went back to the party. I kissed my daughter on the cheek. I told her I was proud of her. I drove home, and I didn't sleep, because the thing I'd heard was too big to process in the dark, and I needed to think like the man I used to be. The one who could read a blueprint and see every load-bearing wall before the building went up. The next morning, I started digging. I'm not a detective, I'm a contractor. But I spent 28 years reading contracts, pulling permits, checking lien records, and verifying the financial backing of every developer I worked with. You don't frame a building on a foundation you haven't tested. So I tested. I started with public records, property searches, court filings, UCC statements. It took me 2 weeks, mostly at the county clerk's office and on online databases, and what I found was a house of cards that would have impressed a magician. Catherine Pemberton's Edgemont Colonial, the one with the brass mailbox and the matching wreath, carried a first mortgage for $680 and a second home equity line for $210. The home was appraised at $890. That left exactly zero cushion. She was leveraged to the wall. Grant's car, the black Audi A6, he parked beside my truck like a rebuke. was a 36-month lease with 18 months remaining, and the lease was in his mother's name. Grant's position at Meridian Partners was not what he'd described. He wasn't a senior development associate, as he'd told Sophie and everyone at the engagement party. He was a junior analyst on a contract that had been renewed twice and was set to expire in 90 days. His base salary was $52,000. The bonus he kept referencing didn't exist. I found this out not through secret channels, but through a man named Phil, a retired estimator who'd done work for Meridian and still had lunch with their project managers. I asked him casually. He told me casually. And then he told me something that made my coffee go cold. Grant's not well liked over there, Tom. Word is he misrepresented his credentials when they hired him, told them he had a degree from Wharton. He went to a community college. They haven't fired him because his mother's connected to one of their lenders, but that lifeline's getting thin. A community college, not Wharton. A junior analyst, not a senior associate. A leased Audi in his mother's name. A family drowning in debt, using connections to stay afloat, and looking at my daughter's income and my paid-off house as their life raft. And the line of credit Catherine had mentioned? The one that was contingent on the marital asset merge? I found it. A commercial financing agreement filed with the state, listing Grant and Catherine Pemberton as co-applicants, with a condition clause that read, "Credit facility to be secured upon consolidation of marital and familial assets of the primary borrower's household." In plain English, the bank wouldn't lend them another dime, unless Grant got married and the combined household assets, including, apparently, the bride's father's property, could be listed as collateral. They needed the wedding, not for love, for a loan. I sat at my kitchen table with those documents spread out in front of me. The mortgage statements, the lease agreement, the UCC filing, the credit facility application, and I felt something I hadn't felt since the day Diane left. That same clean, cold clarity. The kind that comes when the story you've been telling yourself collapses and the truth is standing in the rubble, plain and ugly and impossible to argue with. Sophie didn't know. I was almost certain of that. She thought Grant was successful. She thought his family was wealthy. She thought the Edgemont address and the country club and the Audi meant what they appeared to mean. She'd been sold a picture, and she'd bought it, because the picture was beautiful and the man inside it was tall and confident and told her everything she wanted to hear about the life she was going to have. But she also hadn't defended me. Not at the first dinner. Not at the engagement party. She'd asked me to change my shoes. She'd whispered. She'd looked at her plate. And every one of those small surrenders had been a choice. A quiet, ongoing choice to prioritize their comfort over my dignity. That was the night I stopped waiting for things to get better. I didn't call Sophie. I didn't confront Grant. I did what any man who'd built a business from nothing would do. I made a plan. First, I protected the house. I met with an attorney named Grace Nguyen, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who handled estate and asset law. And I transferred my home into an irrevocable trust with Sophie as the sole beneficiary, but no access until she was 35. The trust protected the property from any creditor claim, any spousal claim, any marital asset merge Catherine Pemberton was counting on. The house was locked. It was mine in life and Sophie's in death, and nothing in between could touch it. Second, I updated my will. I removed a provision I'd had for years, a clause that would have given Sophie and Grant a lump sum upon my death. I replaced it with a structured disbursement that went directly to Sophie, and only Sophie, with no joint access, no community property eligibility, and a condition: if she was married to anyone with an active claim against the trust, the disbursement was held in escrow until that claim was resolved. Third, I picked up the phone and called a man I hadn't spoken to in 4 years. Marcus Webb. Marcus was the senior managing partner at Meridian Partners. He'd been a junior developer when I built Westbrook Commons, and I'd taken a chance on his firm when no one else would. We'd done 4 projects together over the years. Good projects, profitable ones, built on handshakes and honest budgets. I'd sold my company before our paths diverged, but Marcus and I had a history. He knew who I was. He knew what I'd built. And more importantly, he knew what my name meant in this industry. I didn't tell him everything. I told him I'd heard his firm employed a young man named Grant Pemberton, and I asked, casually, the way you ask about whether Grant was everything he presented himself to be. Marcus went quiet for a long time. Then he said, Tom, I can't discuss personnel matters, but I can tell you that the name Pemberton has come across my desk in contexts I won't describe over the phone. Are you telling me Grant Pemberton is about to be your son-in-law? He is. Another silence. I think we should have dinner before the wedding. I agreed. We set a date. And that dinner, which I'll tell you about in a moment, was where the last piece fell into place. But first, something happened that made the whole situation more urgent. Sophie called me on a Thursday evening. Her voice was tight, rehearsed, the way it got when she was delivering a script someone else had written. Dad, Grant and I have been talking, and we think it might be a good idea for you to consider downsizing. Selling the house in Riverside. The market's really strong right now, and you could get a great price. And then maybe you could move into something smaller, something more manageable. Grant found a condo listing that would be perfect for you. A condo? Yeah, it's a one-bedroom in a nice complex, ground floor, so no stairs. It's really sensible, Dad. Grant's mom looked at the numbers, and she said, Sophie, whose idea was this? It's a joint decision. We just want what's best for you. What's best for you? The same phrase Catherine used. The same phrase Grant used. The same phrase, passed from mouth to mouth like a password, designed to sound like love and function like a pry bar. I'm not selling my house. Dad, I built that house with my hands, every stud, every joist, every cabinet. Your bedroom is still in it. I'm not selling it so Grant's mother can use the equity to pay off a line of credit that has nothing to do with me. The silence on the other end was absolute. Not the silence of someone thinking, the silence of someone who just heard something she wasn't prepared for. What are you talking about? She said, and her voice had changed, smaller now, uncertain, the way it used to sound when she was 8, and I'd caught her sneaking cookies before dinner. I'm talking about the fact that you're about to marry into a family that's bankrupt, Sophie. And I'm talking about the fact that they're not interested in you. They're interested in what you can give them access to. That's not true. Grant loves me. I'm sure he says he does. She hung up on me. I stood in my kitchen with the phone in my hand and the boots on my feet, and I let the silence sit, because some silences need to be left alone. You don't chase them, you let them do their work. 3 days later, I had dinner with Marcus Webb. We met at a steakhouse downtown, the kind of place with dark wood and leather menus, and a waiter who calls you sir without meaning it. Marcus was 58, silver-haired, broad-shouldered, a man who'd spent 30 years in an industry that eats soft people. He stood up when he saw me, and he didn't shake my hand. He hugged me, the way men do when they've been through something together and the years haven't erased it. Tom Calloway, I thought you'd fallen off the earth. I've been in my garden. He laughed. We sat, we ordered, and then I told him what I'd found. All of it. The mortgages, the lease, the line of credit, the credential misrepresentation, the plan to use my house as collateral. I laid it out the way I used to lay out project specs. Clean, chronological, with every piece of evidence in its place. Marcus listened. He didn't interrupt. When I finished, he set his glass down and said, I already knew most of it. What I didn't know was the collateral scheme. That's new. And it's worse than I thought. He told me that Meridian had been preparing to let Grant go. His contract was expiring, and the falsified credentials had been discovered during a routine background check for the renewal process. Marcus had been holding off on termination because of the lender connection, Catherine's relationship with a regional bank that had financed 2 Meridian projects. But that relationship was fraying, and Marcus was running out of patience. He's going to be let go, Tom, before the wedding, if I have my way. But his mother is going to fight it, and she's going to use every connection she has to delay it. If you're planning to do something, I'd suggest you do it at the rehearsal dinner. That's where the firm's partners will be. Grant invited several of us as a show of force. He thinks having us there makes him look established. He invited you to his rehearsal dinner? He did. And I'm going to be there. And so are you. He looked at me across the table. Tom, I've known you since you were a man with a truck and a nail gun. You don't need me to tell you how to handle this, but if you need someone in that room who knows the difference between a man who built something and a man who pretended to, I'll be there. I drove home that night, with the windows down, the October air cold on my face, and for the first time in 4 months, I wasn't angry, I wasn't hurt, I was clear. The kind of clear you get when every wall is up, every joint is tight, and the structure is ready to bear weight. The rehearsal dinner was on a Saturday. The venue was Catherine's Country Club, a white-columned building on a hill, with a circular driveway and valets who parked your car and judged it at the same time. I drove the F-150. I parked it myself. I wore clean jeans, a pressed shirt, and my walnut leather Red Wings, the ones I'd resoled twice, the ones that had built 300 houses and one life. 40 people were seated in a private dining room with a view of the 18th green, long tables, white linens, candles in glass holders. Grant was at the center of the head table, champagne in hand, working the room like a man running for office. Catherine was in a pearl gray suit, circulating, touching shoulders, smiling. Sophie was beside Grant in a pale blue dress, and when she saw me, her face did something complicated: relief, worry, apology, all compressed into a single look that lasted half a second before she turned back to the woman beside her. I sat at the end of the head table, 3 seats from Grant. The chair was fine, the silverware was fine, the wine glass was filled. I was the only person in the room in boots. Marcus was 2 tables away, seated with 3 other Meridian partners. He caught my eye and gave me a single nod, the kind of nod that says, "I'm here, and I'm ready." Dinner was served. Salmon, risotto, roasted vegetables. Grant stood up during the main course, tapped his glass, and launched into a speech about Sophie, how beautiful she was, how lucky he was, how they were going to build a life together. He used the word build twice, and both times I almost laughed, because Grant Pemberton had never built anything in his life. He'd leased it, borrowed it, and presented it. Then he turned toward me. "And of course, Sophie's dad is here tonight. Tom Calloway." He put his hand on my shoulder, a proprietary gesture, the kind you use on a subordinate. And he looked across the room at Marcus and said, with a grin that was designed to land as affectionate, but landed as surgical, "Marcus, this is Sophie's dad. He's been unemployed for years. Kind of a loser, honestly, but we're letting him sit at the big table tonight, aren't we, Soph?" The room laughed. Not everyone, but enough. Sophie smiled that practiced smile and said nothing. My hands went cold. I felt the blood pull from my face. My fingers tightened around the napkin, and then I set the napkin down, and I stood up, and I looked at Marcus Webb, and I said 8 words. "I'm Tom Calloway. Marcus, we need to talk." Marcus set his fork down. He looked at me, really looked, the way you look at someone you haven't seen in years and are suddenly seeing clearly. And his face changed. Not shock, recognition. The deep, grounded recognition of a man who's just remembered who he's sitting across from. "Tom Calloway," he said, and his voice carried. "Calloway Construction. The man who built Westbrook Commons. The man who built the Meridian Medical Campus. Tom, I've been looking for an excuse to call you for 4 years." The room went silent. The kind of silent that happens when the ground shifts and everyone feels it at once. Grant's hand was still on my shoulder. I felt it go rigid. I stepped forward gently and his hand fell away. "You built Westbrook Commons?" someone at the far table said. "I built Westbrook Commons," I said, "and the Meridian Medical Campus, and the Edgemont Library that Catherine's book club meets in every Wednesday." I looked at Catherine. Her wine glass was frozen halfway to her mouth. "I built this region's infrastructure for 28 years. I employed 60 people. I sold my company in 2019 for a number that Grant will never see in his life. And I didn't need a leased Audi or a falsified degree to do it." Grant's face drained of color. "Tom, I was joking. It was a joke." "It wasn't a joke, Grant. It was a strategy. The same strategy your mother used when she told Sophie my house should be sold. The same strategy you used when you asked me to downsize. The same strategy behind the line of credit that's contingent on this wedding going through so my paid-off house can be listed as collateral for your mother's debts." I said it calmly. I said it the way I used to say this beam doesn't meet code on a job site. Factual, unarguable, final. Catherine stood up. "That's enough. This is a private family matter." "No, Catherine. It stopped being private when your son stood up in a room full of people and called me a loser to impress a man I've known for 20 years. I reached into the inside pocket of my jacket and pulled out a folder. Thin, manila, unremarkable. the kind I used to carry to job sites every day. These are public records, your mortgages, your son's lease agreement, in your name, not his, the UCC filing for the line of credit, and a copy of the credit facility application that lists my home as intended collateral for a loan that you cannot repay without this wedding. I set the folder on the table in front of Grant. I didn't throw it. I placed it, the way you place a level on a sill plate, with precision, with purpose, so it sits exactly where it needs to. Grant didn't touch it. He was staring at me with a look I'd seen once before, on a job site, years ago, when a foundation wall cracked and the developer realized the entire structure was going to have to come down. That look, the one where the math stops working. Marcus stood. Grant, I was going to have this conversation with you on Monday, but since we're here, your contract with Meridian Partners will not be renewed. The credential discrepancies we found during your background check are now a matter of record. You'll receive formal notice Monday morning. Catherine's face had gone the color of candle wax. You can't do this. Our family has a relationship with... Your family has a relationship with a lender who is 3 months from calling your note, Catherine. I've seen the file. Tom has seen the file. And now every person in this room has heard it. Sophie was sitting in her chair. She hadn't moved. Her hands were in her lap, and her face was doing something I'd seen once before, the day her mother left. That same look. The look of someone realizing the ground they've been standing on was never solid. I turned to her. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Sophie, I built you a life. I built it with these hands, in these boots, in a house you asked me to sell so a man who lied about his education could use it as collateral for a loan his mother can't repay. I paid for your college. I paid for your first car. I paid for the apartment you lived in before you met Grant. I did all of it without asking for a thank you, and I'm not asking for one now. But I am asking you to look at what's on that table and decide whether the man you're supposed to marry tomorrow loves you, or loves what you give him access to. She looked at the folder. She looked at Grant. She looked at Catherine. And then she looked at me, at my boots, my clean jeans, my pressed shirt, my rough hands, and her face broke open, not like a mask, but like a door, the kind of door that's been locked from the inside and finally swings. Dad, she said, and her voice was the voice of the girl on the tailgate, not the woman in the cream dress. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't say it's okay. It wasn't okay. I didn't say I forgive you. I wasn't there yet. I said, I know, and I picked up the folder, and I walked out of the country club with my boots on the marble floor and the October air hitting my face like cold water. The wedding did not happen the next day. Sophie called it off at 6 in the morning. She called me first, and then she called Grant, and from what she told me later, the conversation was short. Grant didn't fight. He'd heard the silence in that room. He knew what had happened. He packed his things from the venue, the tuxedo, the ring, the rented boutonnieres, and he and Catherine drove back to Edgemont in the leased Audi, and the Colonial with the brass mailbox went on the market 3 weeks later because the bank called the note, just like Catherine had feared. Marcus Webb sent me a note, handwritten, on Meridian letterhead. It said, should have called you sooner. The region misses your work. So do I. I put it on my refrigerator, held up by the Sophie made in 2nd grade. A clay circle with my name painted in wobbly blue letters. Grant was let go from Meridian on Monday. He took a job at a warehouse distribution center 2 months later. I heard this through Phil, the estimator, who heard it through a friend. I didn't gloat. I didn't think about Grant much after that. Some people are just structural failures. You note the crack, you move on. Sophie moved back to Riverside. Not into my house. She got her own apartment, a small 1-bedroom 3 blocks away, above a bakery. She came over on Sundays. The first few times, she cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just a quiet, steady leaking, the way a roof leaks when the flashing fails, slow and persistent, and impossible to ignore. She'd sit at my kitchen table and say things like, I should have known, and why didn't I see it? And he told me his family was old money, Dad. He said his grandfather built railroads. His grandfather was a toll booth attendant on the Garden State Parkway, I said once, and she laughed. A real laugh, broken and wet. And I realized I hadn't heard that laugh in over a year. It took time. There's no shortcut for that. She'd been living inside a story someone else wrote, and climbing out of it meant accepting that she'd chosen to stay in it. She'd asked me to change my shoes. She'd let a man call me a loser in a room full of people and smiled about it. Those things don't dissolve because you're sorry. They dissolve because you do the work. The slow, unglamorous, load-bearing work of showing up and being honest and proving day by day that you're not the person you were when you were pretending. She did the work. I watched her do it. And 6 months later, on a Sunday in April, she came over with a bag of groceries and set them on the counter and said, "Dad, I'm going back to school. I applied to a paralegal program. I start in June." I said, "Good." I said, "I'm proud of you." I didn't offer to pay for it. She didn't ask. She was standing on her own foundation now, and we both knew it. That evening, we sat on the porch. The garden was coming in. The tomatoes I'd planted in May were already heavy on the vine, and the light was that long, gold, late afternoon light that makes everything look like it's been varnished. Sophie was in a chair beside me, bare feet up on the railing, and she looked down at my boots, the Red Wings, scuffed, risoled, still holding, and she said, "You wore those to the rehearsal dinner, didn't you, on purpose?" I looked at them. The leather was dark with age. The laces were frayed. The soles had been replaced twice, and would need replacing again. They were the most honest thing I owned. "I wore them because they're mine," I said. "I built everything I have in those boots, and I wasn't going to take them off so a man who's never built anything could feel bigger." She was quiet for a while. Then she reached over and put her hand on mine, the hand that was resting on the arm of the chair, the hand with the calluses, and the scar from the nail gun, and the knuckles that had been cracked so many times they'd stopped trying to heal straight. "I know what family means now, Dad," she said. I looked at her. The light was on her face, and she had my eyes, the ones I'd given her, the ones that had read blueprints and checked levels and stared down bankers who thought a man in flannel couldn't build a skyline. "Yeah," I said, "I think you do." The tomatoes were red on the vine. The boots were on my feet. The house I'd built was mine, and the trust was locked, and the daughter I'd raised was sitting beside me, not because she needed me to hold her up, but because she chose to be there. And the porch was quiet, and the evening was warm, and I was home, in the house I'd built, in the boots I'd worn, in the life that nobody could take from me because I'd earned every square inch of it with my own 2 hands. I'm done paying for love that was never real. I know what's real now. It's not the house, and it's not the money, and it's not the name on a mailbox. It's the girl on the tailgate. It's the boots on the porch. It's the man who built the room he's standing in and never once needed to pretend he was anyone else.